So just understand that it's complicated.
In my head.
Hello everyone. Tonight we're going to talk about a topic that is kind of controversial. It really shouldn't be. I'm hoping as more research is done it becomes normalized. But the topic is gender dysphoria. There's a lot of misunderstandings. There's a lot of people who don't know what it is, who make judgments about what it is, not knowing what it is. So let's clear up some confusion tonight. Well, it started to rain, so I'm going to have to ask you to forgive me for the water all over my glasses. But let's get into gender dysphoria. There's a lot of ground to cover here. So the first distinction that we have to make is terminology here. Sex is your biological parts that you're born with, and those may be male, they may be female, or they may be a combination. We're talking about things like your hormone levels, your structure in your brain, your gonads, you know, the penis, the vagina, the breasts, and all of the anatomy that typically people think of when they're thinking about sex, your chromosomal makeup, all of those things, and I'm sure there's more that I'm not aware of because I'm not like well versed in this. Those all make up your sex. Then you have your gender, which has been assigned to you by society or assigned to you by a doctor, sometimes using your sexual parts to make that consideration, but your gender is basically given to you by society or by somebody outside of yourself. Then you have your gender identity, which is what you feel like when you ask the question, am I male, am I female, am I something else? What do I feel like? And gender identity and sex and gender all play important roles when it comes to gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is when your gender identity doesn't line up with your presentation of gender. So that could be that your sexual parts, your body, doesn't match with your gender. For example, feeling like you are a male and yet you have breasts and a vagina. And the key here in what makes it dysphoria is that you feel a lot of stress about this. Now, this is oversimplifying it, and I will get as nuanced as I can, but the key here is to understand that people have very different levels of how they express their gender, how they identify their gender, and there are a lot of different factors that go into it. And this is where dysphoria becomes possible. You know, people who are intersex, for example, they're born with a mixture of chromosomes, a mixture of hormones, a mixture of sexual parts, depending on their particular instance. Everybody's going to be different. And so there's no clear line to delineate via sex what their gender would be. And even if there were, they could still have gender dysphoria because they may not feel that their identity matches up with that gender. So some other terms that we may need to look at are transsexualism, which is somebody who feels that they're in the wrong gender and so they transition to a different gender. Anatomically, they undergo sexual reassignment surgery, or they go on hormones to express that gender that feels more appropriate towards the way their identity is, how they feel. There's also transgenderism, which is just feeling that you don't feel in the correct gender. The body and the expression doesn't match up with how you feel. And we should distinguish that this is different from having a sexual orientation that is one direction or another. So it's not homosexuality, it's not bisexuality, although you can certainly have those and be transgendered or be transsexual, or transsexual is not really used very often, it's mostly transgendered, but clinically transsexual is the word for somebody who is in the process of transitioning or who has transitioned. And we also should make the distinction that it's not a fetish. There is a transvestitism, I believe the word is, fetish, where somebody feels a dysphoria about dressing up as the opposite sex. They feel a sexual excitement about it, but they also feel incredible distress over it. And that can be a component in dysphoria, gender dysphoria, but I don't want to get that deep into it. So just understand that it's complicated, and if this is something that you're interested in knowing more about, then read about it. That's what I encourage. So typically somebody is going to either have an early onset or a late onset when it comes to gender dysphoria. If it's an early onset, we see it in childhood with a child who is persistently, consistently expressing that they do not feel like this is the correct gender for them. They may express this through refusing to play with toys that are gendered as the opposite gender of what they feel like. They may express this as wanting to dress as a different gender. Or when asked the question, they may just answer, you know, I feel like a boy, I feel like a girl, I don't know what I feel like. And the key here is that they insist on it, and they insist over time. Now, you can have periods in your life of gender dysphoria that go away, and this is where it can get complicated if you're a parent raising a child, because you want to be sure that this is actually how they feel as an identity and not something that they're going through. We will not call this a phase, because this is not a phase. This is a mental, I don't want to say problem, because it's not a problem. If somebody has the wrong identity, you know, homosexuality was in the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, and it was taken out because it was put in there incorrectly, because it was stigmatized. And it's actually, homosexuality is not a mental disorder, it's just a normal variance in the human genome, like eye color. And I would think of transgenderism as something similar. The components may be a little bit more complicated, but I would just want to make a distinction here that the dysphoria is focusing on the stress that somebody feels over this. It's not that transgenderism or anything else is some kind of problem. Nobody's wrong for feeling this way, but the dysphoria is the stress, and that's why it's in the DSM, because just like when somebody experiences anxiety to a level where it's impairing their life, we notice that and we do what we can to help them with it. So we want to be cautious if we're a parent and we have a child who's expressing this, to be sure that it's not just a gender dysphoria that they're going through, and it's not that they actually want to transition into another gender, or that this isn't, we just want to be cautious, that's all. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with our child, doesn't mean that it is a small period, it could be a longer term thing. People can go in and out of these periods. So if somebody is deciding whether or not their child wants to transition and whether they should go ahead with those things, obviously you want to consult with a doctor, you want to consult with a therapist and make sure that you're making the right decisions. There are options available to you. There are hormone blockers. You can delay puberty if the child, the adolescent, is still not really sure of exactly what their gender is. Some people may not actually want to transition. They may just feel that their gender is something like non-binary, or they feel gender fluid, which would mean that they don't identify as male, they don't identify as female, they feel somewhere in the middle. Gender fluid means it kind of can switch back and forth depending on the day, the month, the time of year. It's not specific days or specific times of years. It just kind of comes and goes, that their gender fluidly changes. They may feel more female one day, they may feel more male another day. Somebody who's identifying as non-binary, they just don't fit the male-female dynamic. They may feel more male, but they don't feel like male is the correct identifier for them. So again, there's a lot here that I can't possibly put into this one video. So if you're interested in it, look it up. It's fascinating. Something else that I do want to mention is that people who have dissociative identity disorder, they may have an alter, or if I'm speaking to the alter, you yourself may feel gender dysphoria because your body doesn't match the way that you feel as an alter. You may feel like you are a male alter and you're in a female body, and that may be very stressful for you. So that could be another way that gender dysphoria manifests in a person. Okay, so I'm going to try to throw as many things in here as I can. If you feel like you want to transition, then you can go ahead and take steps to transition. If you don't feel like that's the appropriate step for you, you don't have to do that. There's no rules when it comes to gender. There's no need to be one or the other as far as male and female. There's no need to define your gender. The stress comes from the feeling that something's not correct, something's not right. So part of the dysphoria is always thinking about how something is not right, and if you can kind of take your mind off of it for a little bit, You know, I don't know what the therapies are specifically. I know transition is one option, but I don't know what else might be an option personally. So I know there are options out there. I know there are many, many therapists who understand. So that's a personal decision that you have to make, whether you want to transition or not. I should also mention that there's a lot of people who go through sexual reassignment surgery and then they still have gender dysphoria, and that can be incredibly stressful. The fact that it still even exists can make the gender dysphoria worse after you've gone through a surgery. So I just want to mention that because it is a fairly normal thing. There's nothing wrong with you if you go through the surgery and then you still have some dysphoria. It may take some time to settle into your new parts, your sexual parts, your anatomy, your new gendered parts, however you want to look at them. So expect that if that's something that you're considering. It will be okay to feel a little bit of dysphoria after you go through a surgery. You know, there's a lot of people who just don't get it. There's people in this world who still believe that there's something wrong with homosexuality and bisexuality and everybody else in the LGBTQ plus umbrella. For some reason, they don't seem to understand that this has been studied. We have science for it. It's not what they think it is, and so they stereotype and have nasty things to say. Those people do not matter. The people who matter are the people who understand, such as the therapists who will be able to help you to get you into the system that you need to. If you want to reassign yourself, or if you're a parent, they will help guide you through the system of deciding what's appropriate for your child, discussing it with the child, making sure that it's not something like a body dysmorphic disorder, and that's something else I should get to. So the difference between body dysmorphic disorder and gender dysphoria is that in body dysmorphic disorder, you feel that there is some part of you that is abnormal, that is not correct, and you obsess about getting rid of it. When it comes to gender dysphoria, it's more about feeling that there's an appropriate gender. There's something right that is missing. So it's not focused on getting rid of something, it's focused on restoring what feels correctly and getting the outward appearances to match that. I know that maybe is a little hard to grasp, but there is an important distinction there. So somebody who has body dysmorphic disorder does not necessarily have gender dysphoria, and somebody who has gender dysphoria does not necessarily have body dysmorphic disorder, although you could absolutely have both. So I'm going to turn this over to you. If you're somebody who's had gender dysphoria, I'd love to hear your experience. I know there are millions of other people out there who've had the same experience as you, so do not feel alone in that. If you feel comfortable, share that below, what you've gone through, maybe what has helped you with the gender dysphoria. And I'd love to hear from anybody, really. You don't have to be somebody who's transitioning. You don't have to be somebody who currently has gender dysphoria. Maybe you had it and it went away. I know a lot of people, I was reading through the DSM, and a lot of people, they will have the gender dysphoria, then as they enter adolescence, they'll start to define themselves as gay or lesbian, and then as they continue past adolescence, the gender dysphoria comes back and they realize, no, I'm actually gender dysphoric and I actually want to transition to the other sex. So again, this is complicated, so the more people talking about it, the better. We all need to hear your stories so that we can all get a better understanding of what's going on and so that we can humanize it. My channel is all about humanizing mental health, so I would love to hear from you if you're comfortable sharing. Anybody who wants to, leave that below. Tell us about your story. Tell me about like what was the most stressful part of the gender dysphoria for you. Now, if you're somebody who's new here, I do mental health videos Monday through Friday. Please hit subscribe and hit the bell after you hit subscribe to get notifications every time I do a video. If you like the stuff that I've been doing on here, I have a Patreon page. You can go over there and get some behind the scenes kind of stuff, some extra stuff that I'm doing. I'm actually currently working on something for that. And you can support me over there and get that stuff, so that's kind of cool. And otherwise, thank you for joining me here, and don't forget to leave that comment if you've had gender dysphoria.